Now, with no further ado, really one of the leading specialists I think, in the world in this area, and I'm not just saying that, because Anne really has worked all over the world as a specialist in the area of human-canine relationships, as one of the leaders that defined the Pet Partner Program, or it used to be called the Delta Society programs. She's one of our faculty, has been involved with us from the beginning, and we're really proud to have her here.
Thank you. Thank you all for being here and giving up this lovely sunny day to be in this room. As lovely as this room is, it's not quite the same as being outside, so thank you very much. And boy, I want to mention, Philip, you gave me a great gift when you said, would you come? And I said, what do you want me to talk about? And he said, well, you can kind of talk about whatever you want. And it was like, wow, really? I really can talk about, oh, wow, that's kind of a big responsibility. So yes, indeed, it is a great pleasure to be here getting to talk with you about something that has been on my mind for a long time, many, many years. And I'm attempting to articulate it in a way that is understandable. So you all can give me feedback at the end on whether or not that is understandable or not. So I do thank you, Philip, and the University of Denver, IHAC, Chuck and Don's, all of you. Thank you so much for making this possible. Before I really jump in, I just need to say a little bit about that little guy in the photograph up there. His name is Gusto, and in that photograph he is 4 months old. He came into my life at a very, very dark time in my life, and I learned that he is what Mike Dooley calls a gladiator of love and joy. Isn't that a delicious phrase? Yeah, the juxtaposition of gladiator and love and joy speaks to me. So I hope that you might have a gladiator of love and joy in your life, or if not now, that you will find one in the future. Let me see if I can remember how to do this. That was not right. Okay, good. I once heard a radio interview where a woman called herself a worshiper of dogs. And I was a little surprised by that, a little bit worried that people would think then that she was trying to replace religion in someone's life, but she quickly went on to alleviate those concerns. And I think that I might fit into that category as well, and I'm wondering if maybe you might too. As you think about when you're driving and you notice a dog head or a dog tail waving back and forth in the car in front of you, what happens in your heart? As you're in a coffee shop and involved in a great conversation with someone, can your conversation be diverted because you see a dog walking by outside? What about when your dog comes up and rests his head on your lap or on your knee? Does your heart just swell? Do you cry even surreptitiously in a movie when a dog dies? When you can remain stoic if a person dies? Well, if so, you might fit into that category of a worshiper of dogs as well. And I think that's probably what has brought us together here today, our mutual respect for dogs, the things that they do for us, and what we would like to be able to do for them. So let's take a look at some of these things. They say that people look like their dogs or dogs look like their people. I don't know. I think this is a great picture. And yeah, since she had red hair, of course, that's who I was going to choose on the photos that I had to look at. Don't know if we start out that way or if we end up that way. But anyway, I can think of a lot worse things that I could be compared to than looking like my dog. How many of you let your dog on your bed? Yeah, yep. The comfort of being next to a warm body, no matter how many legs that body has, is an emotional balm. We don't have to be depressed or lonely. to appreciate the warmth of having someone in bed with us. Modern Dog Magazine reported a survey that over 50% of dog owners allow their dog on their bed. Nearly 6 out of 10 women aged 18 to 34 allow their dog on their bed. Married men over the age of 45 were the most likely to ask the dog to leave the bed. Yet still, almost 40% of those men allowed the dog on the bed with them. And humanity has a long history of allowing dogs on the bed. Many rich, famous, powerful people have given their dogs bed privileges. Some information carved on the tomb of Ramses the Great, the Egyptian pharaoh. He had a hound named Pahates, and the title of that hound was Bed Companion to the Pharaoh. Alexander the Great was known to have rested from his battles, sleeping beside his greyhound. Much later, Queen Victoria died in bed with her favorite Pomeranian, Turi. Peter the Great, Tsar of Russia, Frederick the Great of Prussia, they had Italian greyhounds that they slept with. So, as you can tell, if you allow your dog on the bed, you are in auspicious company. You might have heard the joke about the man who named his dog Soap and Water so that he could always say that every day he washed his dishes with soap and water. Well, there is something about sharing food that creates intimacy, and providing food is an act of caregiving, an act of peace. Well, from the other side of that, I've been in many situations where people have said, no, please don't feed the dog, which has really only served to make the feeding kind of surreptitious, make them sneaky about feeding instead of feeding openly. So dogs, over the years, have perfected the look of abject starvation, and many of us respond by wanting to provide nurturing and food to that look. How many of you here consider your dog a part of the family? Yeah. There are, a 2011 Harris Interactive poll reported that more than 3 in 5 Americans own a pet, and out of that number, 9 in 10 say that they consider their pet a member of the family. So we see this in photographs where people dress their dogs up in gear. We see this at Halloween often, where dogs are dressed up and not just dogs. We see family photographs that include dogs in them. So yes, we do know that many times people consider their pets family members. And as Philip was just mentioning, that carries a great responsibility with it in case of disaster or recession. It was interesting to me that just about 2 months ago, the Humane Society of the United States put out a pledge. They were asking people to sign, stating that in case of an emergency, they would take their pet with them. Yes, I would hope that all of us would be able to do that, and yet we know that sometimes things happen where we really don't have the control we would like for caring for our animals. It has been, yeah, I appreciate the O's in the audience and looking at that photograph. It has been reported that children who live with pets and are attached to their pets tend to function better emotionally. This year, a study in England of 1,000 pet-owning students between the ages of 5 and 16 reported that 86% of those students felt that having their dog assisted them to do better in their homework and to do better in schoolwork in general. That number jumped to 92% when we looked at the people who owned mice and rats. So it doesn't have to be just dogs. And nearly half of all of the pet-owning students believed that owning and looking after a pet made them smarter. Made them happier. A third claimed to be calmer, and a fifth claimed that they were smarter. So children can learn to understand the needs of pets, the needs, the feelings, and perhaps not only of pets, but also to generalize that to other people. I would say that perhaps this child has not quite learned that lesson yet. And in fact, that brings up the point that children don't necessarily learn these lessons through osmosis just by living with a pet. There is the need for a caring, responsible, responsive adult to be able to help the child learn those lessons. And we do know ourselves that a pet can provide a source of social support for us, not just for children. We've probably all experienced the sting of social feedback by other humans and the comfort that we feel when we have gone to spend time with our pet. Just last week, there was an interview on the radio with Scott Adams, I believe that's the correct name, the writer of the Dilbert cartoons. And he was mentioning that he has a condition or a disease that affects his ability to speak. And so he does not speak in public very often. It's not a stutter like we think of repeating a sound, but it's like the vocal cords stop working. So almost like when your phone isn't working and you only get pieces. That was what he was describing. But what was most interesting to me in that interview was that he said that that condition is not at all apparent when he talks to his cat. And he brought that up twice. He wasn't prompted. He brought that up on his own twice. Now, he didn't say that there was any kind of an emotional component to his condition, but certainly he was noticing that there was a difference in him, in his ability to be himself when he was with his cat. Well, I hope each of you laughs every day with either your family members or with your animals. Yes, indeed, this is from a friend of mine in Tennessee, and the dog got that stuck on his head all by himself. She did not put that on there for him. She did take it off shortly after getting the photograph, but you know, sometimes getting the photograph first is important. I know that my two dogs give me many opportunities for laughter, deep belly laughter every day. And scientists have studied the effects of laughter since the 1970s. It's become increasingly recognized and accepted that there's a complex relationship between the behavior that we exhibit when we are feeling emotional and our biologic functioning, especially in our muscular and respiratory systems. Of the several types of laughter that are out there, what I'm going to focus on today is mirthful laughter, which is most closely associated with humor. So humor when we are laughing humorously, that can actually improve our immune system. The psychoneuroimmunology research, wish I could have said that a little smoother to impress you with my ability to say those multisyllabic words, but nonetheless, psychoneuroimmunology research at Indiana State University was the leader in identifying that there can be an improvement in immune function through laughter. Mirthful laughter has a profound effect on our circulating, our arterial blood pressure. When we start to laugh, our blood pressure rises. When we continue to laugh, the blood pressure will fluctuate. And when we stop laughing, the blood pressure goes down to a level lower than it was when we started. Well, that information led to a conundrum among the healthcare community because they thought, well, that could mean that laughter is bad for your health because of that spike in blood pressure at the beginning. Fortunately, research has shown that very few people have died of laughter, so we are free now to continue to laugh as it comes up. And instead, we know that there is an improvement in our cardiovascular functioning with laughter. Dr. Lee Burke at Loma Linda University started studying the effects of mirthful laughter on the regulation of hormones in the 1980s. And he found that laughter helps the brain regulate the stress hormones cortisol and epinephrine. So they also discovered a link between laughter and the production of antibodies and endorphins. And as you may know, endorphins are the body's natural painkillers. Laughter helps the brain regulate dopamine levels. And you might know that dopamine is considered the reward hormone. It gives us that feeling of pleasure. or one of the feelings of pleasure that we can feel. So yes, there is, we know instinctively that we feel better when we are laughing, and now we know science is proving a little bit about why we are feeling better. So how many of you would laugh if you came home to this? Some of you have come home to something like this. My dearest, most precious Gusto, I will say, has, as a puppy, never chewed up anything. I'm really true. I'm really honest about that. But I will say that occasionally he sampled things. And there was one day that I left our new Kindle on the bedside table. And he did sample it. There was just one teeny tiny little tooth mark in just one corner. Just happened to be the corner where the on-off switch was. So yes, that Kindle was toast. But yeah, we have a choice about whether we laugh or cry, whether we laugh or get angry, because our animals give us lots of opportunities for these kinds of responses. And I believe we open ourselves up to a much greater being if we allow ourselves to laugh. Gordon Allport is an American psychologist, and he was one of the founders of the study of personality. And he put it this way: so many tangles in life are ultimately hopeless that the only appropriate sword we have is laughter. I like that. Would you be surprised to know that other species laugh? After learning about the beneficial effects of laughter, we probably shouldn't be surprised to know that other species laughed. Dr. Jaak Panksepp is well known in the field of animal behavior. And in the late 1990s, he did research and proved that rats laugh. So some of you have probably seen this video, maybe many times, but I think it deserves to be repeated here.
As we have listened to animals playing, we have heard what appeared to be the sounds of laughter. And we studied these for a couple of years without quite understanding that this might be laughter. And then one day we decided to tickle some animals. And we realized that we had to look at the sounds at a very different register than we can hear. So we obtained these transducers that are called bat detectors, that can bring very high frequencies down to our auditory range. And when we did this and we listened in, we could tickle animals and generate a lot of vocal activity that appeared to be laughter. These animals would begin to enjoy our company, and they would start to play with our hands, and wherever we would put our hands, they would follow it. And when we tested these animals to ask whether they were enjoying this kind of activity, the unambiguous answer was yes.
I love that so many of you were laughing while you were watching that. So why am I talking about rats? We're supposed to be here talking about dogs. Well, because of the research. No one has done research on laughing dogs yet. But the study on rats and laughter has shown that repeated tickling of rats, who like to be tickled, led to a higher rate of growth of nerve cells in the hippocampus. So that could be important. I like the idea of more nerve cells in my brain. And to me, it means a lot that something that is beneficial to me, that I enjoy with laughter, can also be beneficial in other species. Now, I need to say, not every rat likes to be tickled, and so we must respect that in all species in doing the kinds of things that they like or they don't like. But aside from the research about neurogenesis, personality disorders, all of that type of thing, I would like to ask you if it feels like a spiritual experience when you laugh. Maybe you've never thought about laughter as a spiritual experience. I'd like to ask if the next time, perhaps, that you are laughing with your dog, that you open yourself up to the idea that maybe that could be a spiritual experience. I have learned that my laughter is reinforcing to my dogs. When they start doing some things and I start laughing, that behavior will escalate and will continue, which of course makes me laugh more. So yeah, interesting how much they are paying attention to us in ways that we might not be aware. I named my dog 5 Miles so I can tell people I walk 5 miles every day. We're all familiar with the fact that the human body tends to work better if we can move it a little bit more, and people who own dogs are often assumed to be healthier because they're assumed to be walking those dogs. That isn't always the case. But the Calorie Count website has reported that a 150-pound person can burn 204 calories by walking a dog for an hour. I like burning calories, especially when it's a pleasurable experience for me. And I get up at 4:30 every morning to walk with my husband and our dogs. 4:30 is awfully early, and it is really, really dark at 4:30, especially in my area of the country, but probably in this area of the country as well. Yet, that is a very precious time to me. I love the time that I can spend with my husband. I love the time that I can spend with my dogs, or I wouldn't be getting up at 4:30. Interestingly enough, I have a different emotional experience if I'm walking just with my husband, or if I'm walking with my husband and our dogs, or if I'm walking just with my dogs. Aside from the fact that, yes, there's a different emotional experience when I'm walking when it's dark, and the only illumination I have is my headlamp, versus when I'm walking during the daytime, I, for some reason, feel a sense of pressure to be talking when it's my husband that I'm with, for us to be communicating and taking advantage of that time together instead of being silent. Whereas I have no problem at all being silent when I'm just walking with my dogs. And in fact, that's part of the beauty of going for a walk with my dogs is I don't have to say anything. When I'm walking with them, I can be watching them. It is part spiritual experience. It's part practice in being present. It's part glimpse into the world of being a dog, and yeah, that's pretty special to me. If you've seen the movie Gravity, please do not allow that to affect your enjoyment of this comic. This is a comic called Red and Rover by Brian Bassett. I don't know if any of you are familiar with Red and Rover. Red is the little boy and Rover is his dog, and together they go on many adventures. Many times they are going on adventures by box, and they are on a box adventure here. I don't know, it's kind of hard to see, but there's an American flag and NASA printed on the side of that box. So I love, it's again, probably hard to see, but Rover has a lovely, happy expression on his face. At least that's how I interpret it. I kind of love the fact that Rover's on a leash. Even when they're out in space. And I just imagine the adventures that they are having together and wondering about you going on adventures with your dogs. A friend of mine recently pointed out a quote from the poem Sir Henry by Lydia Millett, and perhaps it will speak to you. Could you go on forever with your dog at your side? What if he kept going? Across the city, over the bridge, walking perfectly until darkness fell over the country. Sometimes he wished he could gather together all the dogs he loved most and walk off the end of the world with them. These dogs have had an adventure. And when I see dirty dogs like this, I imagine happy dogs, and I imagine people that are happy because they've been going on that spiritual and physical and emotional adventure with their dogs. Of course, then, there's the physical exercise and adventure that comes with bathing them after they have had those kinds of dirty adventures. And perhaps equally important to the physical exercise is the emotional bonding that comes through providing physical care. Human bonding is the process of developing a close emotional relationship, interpersonal relationship. It happens often through family relationships, through groups of people that spend time together. It's an interactive process. It's a mutual process, and it's characterized by emotions such as affection, trust. So for many parents, bonding with their infant is a byproduct of everyday caregiving. Countless studies have proven the essential effect of touch on infants. Frédéric Leboyer, a French obstetrician and author of Loving Hands, The Traditional Art of Baby Massage, put it this way: being touched and caressed, massaged, is food for the infant. Food as necessary as vitamins, minerals, and proteins. I'm not suggesting that touching our dogs is food for them, but I am wondering if it's like food for us. I really do enjoy grooming my dog. It takes me about 2 hours to brush out Gusto, bathe him, and dry him. And that's a very intimate time. I'm touching him all over, and I love touching him all over. I love feeling his strong muscles. I love watching how he responds, how patiently he will lift a foot. I love seeing quickly, I know what he's supposed to feel like. I know how he's supposed to respond if he's feeling well. So if he moves away or if he seems a little uncertain about something, that gives me good information, early information about his health and his well-being. So it's very precious time to me. I also love his energy when bath is done. Yay, I survived! And as he's running around and getting other dogs and people, if he can, to join in his celebration. I have another dog. We have 2 dogs. Gusto will be turning 3 in December. This other dog just turned 1 last week. And she, as I was preparing this presentation, I was noticing that she would come up to me as I was at the computer and stand up on her hind legs and put her front legs on my lap. And I started noticing that she was doing that when I was particularly frustrated with the computer. And I will just let you in on a little secret. Last week, PowerPoint wiped out my slides, all but 3 of them. So I've had a lot of frustration with my computer recently. So I don't know whether she was noticing my emotion or not. I think she certainly could have been noticing my emotion and coming over to change me. And at 25 pounds, if I choose to put her in my lap, I can't put her in my lap and continue to work on the computer. It just doesn't work. But I also noticed that having her on my lap and feeling her warmth and her pressure against me really changed my attitude about the computer. So I would go ahead and put her up on my lap periodically. Well, that ended up being reinforcing to her. So the more that I did that, the more she was asking, yeah, this is pretty good. And if I had thought about it, I would have included another photograph of her lying on her back, totally relaxed on my lap. Yeah, it would have given you an idea of how much she enjoys it, and you would have had to take my word for it and how much I enjoy it. This photograph is particularly tender to me. This woman seems completely absorbed in the love that she's feeling for her dog. And she's not afraid to show that love. I don't know for sure, but I can imagine that if we replaced the dog and put a human partner and we were celebrating their 10th anniversary, for example, that the intensity and the intimacy might not be quite the same. For the photo, it might have been tossed off, yes, okay, we'll get the photo shot, no matter how wonderful their relationship might be. But here, I see the tenderness and my soul responds. I don't have any idea how many people throw their dogs parties, but I do know that a Bing search brought up more than 95 million sites that would tell me how to throw a party for my dog, how to order invitations for my dog, how I could get connected with a dog party planner. So apparently there's lots of information out there. And that 2011 Harris Interactive poll that I mentioned earlier reported that 1/3 of dog owners frequently buy their pets presents, not just at their birthdays, but throughout the year. Well, you know, we do have good relationships, and sometimes that bond breaks. This is a photograph from my local shelter. This is a dog that was dropped off overnight. with no note, a rope around the neck, tiny little space, and the eyes of that dog really speak to me. I'm not going to quote statistics here. We don't need to know how many dogs are euthanized to appreciate the fact that the bond sometimes breaks, and we have a lot of work to do as we are improving our relationships with dogs and animals. Well, with life comes death. And when we open our hearts to the love of animals, we open our hearts to great pain when they leave us. And the pain, perhaps, of making a decision for euthanasia or not. The fact that people can grieve an animal's death is gaining wider acceptance by doctors and counselors, by the general community. And there are a surprising number of pet sympathy products on the market, so capitalism has recognized the fact that we can grieve over animals, whether the medical community has or not. Many of us are asking for end-of-life and hospice care for our beloved companion animals. I believe this is somewhat driven by the expansion of these services for people, but I also believe that the more we open ourselves to our relationships with our animals, the more we want for them. And sometimes that includes hospice care and pain relief. Interestingly enough, the International Association for Animal Hospice and Palliative Care held their yearly conference here in Denver just 2 weeks ago. Well, we get involved with dogs in lots of ways. And you might not be surprised that since I have Wheatons, I would show a picture of a Wheaton as a winner here in an AKC confirmation show. But one of the main reasons that I chose this photograph is because of the look on the handler's face. I've seen lots of handlers in lots of AKC shows, and they don't always look this much in wonder. Now, I also don't want to say that actually, let me back up for a minute. When I was preparing for this presentation, I contacted the AKC, curious about how many dogs participate in AKC events in a year. The response astounded me. Now, I know that one dog can participate in more than one event in a year. Nonetheless, in the year 2012, just last year, just in the United States, just AKC events, almost 3 million dogs participated. Now, there are far more than just confirmation shows. The AKC, other organizations sanction competitions for obedience, rally, fieldwork, agility, search and rescue, musical freestyle, lure coursing, flyball, tri-ball, nose work, dock diving, search and rescue, frisbee, earth dogs, tracking, herding, schutzhund. You see, I had to keep looking at my list because there's so many I couldn't remember all of them, and of course that's not an inclusive list. So yeah, we really do love being involved in activities with our dogs. And some dogs work for a living, not just as a service dog, although this is a service dog, but the Guiding Eye estimates that there are 20,000 service dog partners in the United States, with far more people on waiting lists to receive service dogs. One of the most interesting aspects of my prior work in the service dog field was related to the retirement of a service dog. The human partners were usually highly emotionally bonded with this service dog and very distraught at having to shift their attachment from the dog who had been working for them to a new dog. And if the organization was requiring that they remove that dog from their home in order to get another working dog, virtually every person chose to keep the dog and lose that assistance rather than lose that dog. So that says a lot to me about the power of the bond. And of course, there's animal-assisted therapy. Therapy dogs who visit schools, hospitals, nursing homes, various places to either participate in therapy or improve quality of life. This is a photograph from a children's grief group that I was highly involved with for many years, so it's a favorite photograph of mine. The website therapydogorganizations.net provides a listing of 559 organizations by state that do therapy dog work. I'm sure that's not comprehensive, but nonetheless, 559 organizations in the United States. Therapy dog work has become prestigious. Many people want to have a therapy dog, whether their dog wants to be a therapy dog or not. So that means those of us involved in the field have an obligation to assure animal welfare, to assure that those animals are being protected. And there's another type of therapy dog. These other dogs are personal dogs who do not qualify as a service dog, yet upon whom their owners rely for emotional stability. Probably all of us in this room fit into that category in one level or of another. And that close emotional bond is what I'm talking about today. Anatole France said, "Until one has loved an animal, a part of one's soul remains unawakened." Whether you agree with that or not, I believe that opening ourselves up to our animals as individual beings allows our souls to grow and expand into a wondrous dimension. And people often say freely that they love their dogs. But do we? Do our actions back that up? We need to take a look at relationship. Social workers are very familiar with the concept of relationship and how important that is. When I was in graduate school, I was taught that the method of therapy that I used was less predictive of success with my clients than was the relationship that I have with them. In other words, my relationship was more important than the style of therapy that I used. And to me, it's not a stretch to apply that maxim about relationship to my relationship with my dogs as well. Yet, how many people actively nurture a relationship with their dogs? I could probably say how many people actively nurture a relationship with other people in their lives as well, but since we're talking about dogs, yeah, how many of us work at it rather than simply expecting our dog to be thrilled to be in the presence of our sparkling personality and our wondrousness? Yeah, having a relationship takes work. It's natural for a relationship to change over time. The relationship that we have with someone when we first meet them changes as we get to know them and as we spend more time together. So the question is not, does it change? The question is, do we exert effort to maintain that relationship, or do we let things slide? Therapist John Gottman is very well known in marriage and family circles. He has designed and developed a method of identifying, a highly accurate method of identifying whether a couple that comes to him is going to reconcile or split. And he discovers this in less than an hour. I'm going to show you a little bit of a video that has him explaining this. We won't go into detail, but just take a look at what that shows.
Let me start by talking about what it is we learned that allows us to predict divorce or stability with very high accuracy. The first thing we found was that if you take a look at the ratio of positive stuff during conflict, things like interest, asking questions, being nice to one another, being kind, being affectionate, being empathetic, and you look at all the negative stuff like criticism, hostility, anger, hurt feelings, and you take the ratio of positive to negative, in relationships that stay together, that ratio turns out to be 5-to-1. There's 5 times as many positive things going on in relationships that work as negative. So that's an interesting equation. And it sort of suggests that if you do something negative to hurt your partner's feelings, that you have to make up for it with 5 positive things. So the equation is not balanced in terms of positive and negative. Negative has a lot more ability to inflict pain and damage than positive things have to heal and bring you closer. Now, the couples who wound up divorced, that ratio was 0.8-to-1. So there was a little more negativity than positivity in couples who were heading for divorce.
Interesting. So based on that truth in relationships, I wonder how that ratio might apply to our work with our dogs, our relationships with our dogs. It seems to me that our dogs are much more forgiving of negatives than our human partners. It also seems to me that we might shower a whole lot more negative on our dogs than we do on our human partners. So I'd like to ask you to consider two things. One is, what kind of relationship do you expect to have with your dog? And two, what do your interactions with your dog say about your relationship? I believe that we have both a personal and a professional relationship with our working dogs or other animals. Yeah, I snuck in a photograph of a donkey here. I just loved that photograph, and I didn't have as good a one of a dog, so yeah, you guys all get credit for noticing that it wasn't a dog in both photographs. Yeah. So our personal relationship with our dogs is affected by the amount of time we spend with them, as well as what we do together during that time. We're all probably quite familiar with the phrase about quality versus quantity of time. However, spending 30 really quality minutes with our dogs does not quite make up for 23 hours and 30 minutes of being in a crate. So we have to be aware of what we're doing all the time. When I'm preparing for a presentation like this, I'm sitting at the computer quite a bit. My dogs are around me, but that doesn't count. I'm not giving them my attention. Have any of you ever felt aggravated at a spouse or a friend who seems very quick at the slightest lull in conversation to pick up the smartphone and get involved in checking in Facebook or do a game? Probably most of us have experienced that at one time or another. Well, that could be similar to how our dogs feel when we are engrossed in that black box that we're looking at as the computer, or doing other things instead of giving attention to the dog. From spending time with you, your dog has a pretty good idea of what brings you happiness and what brings you anger, for example. Experiences like hanging out at home, going for a walk around the park, going to the vet or the groomer, sharing food, training, how you discipline your dog. All give your dog great examples, plenty of chances to learn who you are. Not just the persona you put on for work and social events, but who you really are. Well, that's one reason we love our dogs, right? You know, they like being around us, or at least they act like they do when we're not at our best. So we are fortunate to have dogs around us who put up with a lot, who put up with our not best. At the same time, our dogs really know us, the real us. They know whether we're trustworthy and reliable or whether we're inconsistent and unpredictable. Our behavior affects our relationship with them. How you see your dog and how your dog sees you when there's nothing else going on is the baseline of your personal relationship. The toys or food you use in training games are not the relationship. Even the emotions that you have are not the relationship. Instead, those things build the relationship. I love the intensity in this dog's gaze. Philip, you probably see in your dog this kind of a gaze all the time. When my dog looks at me like this, I feel like Wonder Woman. And at the same time, I feel tremendous responsibility to keep my dog's trust. Because to me, those eyes convey trust in my ability to give him good things and keep him safe. I feel strongly that it is my job to take care of my dog's emotional needs as well as physical needs, and that both of those things comprise safety. Unfortunately, I'm afraid that our dog's emotional needs are frequently overlooked, or even worse, are not even acknowledged as a legitimate need. My dog is a living, breathing being. As a result, I believe he deserves respect. I believe he deserves consideration, both at home and at work, both physically and emotionally. I want our relationship to be mutually enjoyable, not just one-sided. In order for my dog to trust me, to enjoy being with me, he has to trust me. And trust comes from building a strong personal relationship. Yeah? You agree? Thanks for that comment. Perfect timing. If this dog did not trust this handler, who knows how he might have responded to that many-limbed monster coming and bending over him. The handler actually looks a little shell-shocked herself in this photo. And as handlers, we may take these kinds of sights for granted. Our dogs, however, may not. Dogs who trust their handlers are more likely to look to their handlers when in a situation that they're unsure of. And isn't that what we really want in a therapy dog? Even in a companion dog. We want them to be confident, yet to look to us when they're unsure. I want my dogs to freely choose to look to me as a trusted partner. The way I can do this is by developing a history of safe and secure interactions. My physical strength and ability to force the dog to do what I want, the loudness of my voice, have no place in a trusting relationship. It's a little late in our time together for me to be confessing my biases, and you've probably already guessed that it is important to me to foster joy and passion in my dogs. I want them to experience life to the fullest, yet also to access self-control when they need to, and to access me for support when needed. I want both of us to enjoy life to the fullest and to get the greatest possible pleasure in the things that we do together. I want us to be good friends. I want my dog to feel like a world champion before he ever goes on his first AAT session with me, before he ever goes to his first nose work trial, before we go on a walk around the park. I'm not at all interested in having a dog who waits for me to tell him everything to do, or who needs me to think for him. A key piece of relationship is accepting the dog that you have, with her individual quirks, her particular interests, her idiosyncrasies. This is a dog this is Troy. She's a Portuguese water dog. She died many, many years ago, but she was one of the best therapy dogs I've ever had. And when I got her, she was about 4 years old, she and I had very different interacting styles. So I went to a training class, figuring that's one of the best ways to get myself in gear for regular time each week to go to class and help me practice. And in maybe the second class, I was working so hard. And probably my jaw was clenched. I don't have memory of that. But the trainer pulled me aside. She said, "Come here." She pulled me aside, allowing other people to do their thing, and she said to me softly but directly, "Anne, yeah, I want you to pretend that you like this dog." What? What do you mean? I love this dog. What are you talking about? Well, no, my actions were showing my frustration. They weren't showing that I liked her or loved her. I was showing very clearly my frustration. She, I don't know exactly how she grew up. I have talked to the breeder that I got her from. I know something about it, but she definitely needed to be told everything to do. She waited to be told, and if she didn't know what to do, she would literally fall down on the ground and just lie down. Well, I just told you that I have a hard time with that, so clearly our styles were not meshing very well. I was having a hard time accepting her personality, led to lots of frustration in me. Troy didn't want to be around my frustration. She preferred to avoid it, and of course that led to more frustration on my part. Yeah, well, we overcame a lot of that. As I said, she was one of the best therapy dogs I've ever had. But when I look back now, I think that I did not really accept her as who she was. I needed another therapy dog. And that's why I got her. And I think I had a mental compartment, a mental box in my head that I put her in as my working dog. And I don't think that I really developed a personal relationship with her. I don't think I took the time to really understand her needs. I don't think that I acted in her best interests all the time. I think it was all about my best interests of having another working dog. Well, I feel sad, a little embarrassed, well, a lot embarrassed to be confessing that to you, but it's true. And I feel like I need to clarify also, when I talk about acceptance, I'm not talking about accepting bad behavior. What I mean by acceptance is allowing your dog to be the best dog that he or she can be, regardless of the way your prior therapy dog worked. I hope that I've learned enough to act differently if a similar dog comes into my life now. I hope that I can work with her the way she is, that I can work to strengthen areas that I think she could use some strengthening in, to keep my expectations fair, realistic for that particular dog, and to support her emotional safety needs as well as her physical safety needs. In other words, I need to listen to my dog as much or more than I listen to me. Relationship is a two-way street. It's not just about me and my needs, but it is instead about both of us and both of our needs. I don't know how many of you read the comics. Comics are a very important part of my life. I may not listen to the news or read the news, but I will read the comics. I subscribe to some to come in my inbox, and I will read those every day. That's one of the ways that I cope with life. And here, Mutts, you might be familiar with Mutts by Patrick McDonnell. We see a squirrel talking to a man, and a quote by Benjamin Hoff. Lots of people talk to animals. Not very many people listen, though. That's the problem. If we really listen to our therapy animal partners, our behavior will be different than when we're only paying attention to ourselves. We can learn a lot about a person's relationship with her dog by watching her behavior with that dog. So, if we perceive ourselves as having a respectful relationship with our dogs, that can't help but affect the kind of training method we choose to use. There are many different methods out there. I'm looking for ones that respect my relationship. As many of you know, I make my living as a dog trainer in addition to a counselor. And this photo is of my boy Gusto doing some nose work. We were in a house, and there were 3 scents placed around the house that he had been trained to find. He searched through the entire house, found all 3 of them in less than 2 minutes. So it may not seem like a lot in this photograph, but there is a scent in that drawer that he has just found. He's showing you his best side, by the way. So I'm really proud of him. I am loving being able to participate with him in this. And I also love to be able to say that all of that training has been coercion-free. There's nothing coercive about the training related to nose work. So when I was growing up, I will say that there was no such thing as positive animal training. Our farm dog was literally chained to the garage to be the first animal that someone would encounter as they came onto our property. My farm animals were there to do a job. And as far as I could tell, part of that job was to be the recipient of anger that my father was unable, or that he chose, I'm sure, not to exert on us. I saw my father whip our animals as a matter of course. I think he probably learned that from his father, who learned that from his father, who learned that from his father. I don't know. I never talked to him about that. But that was just what people did to farm animals, as far as I knew. Perhaps my father had so much rage inside that hitting the animals was an acceptable outlet instead of hitting us. As a child, I labeled that behavior as normal because that's all that I knew, but I still did not want to emulate that behavior myself. I didn't want to make that same choice. Well, as an adult, after getting a dog and realizing that I needed to learn how to train this dog, I went to classes and I was faced anew with very harsh training methods. They were designed to force my will on the dog. And once again, I rejected these methods, but unfortunately, I did not reject them immediately, but instead I tried to follow the instruction that I was getting. Perhaps some of you are familiar with the Milgram experiment. This was a social psychology experiment conducted in 1961 by Stanley Milgram at Yale University. In his experiment, he tested people's willingness to follow the instructions of an authority figure. And those instructions were to administer increasingly high electrical shocks to people. The experiment, the people supposedly receiving the shock were in a different room. They were not being shocked. And the study participants were actually the people who were supposedly administering these shocks. The person who was giving instructions was dressed in a lab coat. Questions were asked of these people in this closed room. If they did not answer correctly, then this person was to give them an electric shock. With each time they answered incorrectly, the shock was to be increased until it got very, very high. So they were actually being studied about their willingness to follow the instructions of an authority figure. They would hear screams that were recorded. The actors on the other side of the wall would bang on the wall, pleading for mercy, not to make the shocks higher. Yet, 65% of the study participants administered the highest level of shock at least once and up to 3 times. And the highest level of shock was after there was no response from the person supposedly getting the shock. It was quiet on the other side. This study has been replicated around the world with varying levels of compliance among the test subjects. So it wasn't just a one-time thing. However, the point remains that human beings are incredibly capable of inflicting harm on others. And I feel very badly that I learned that I'm one of those by trying to follow those instructions. No, not by trying. I followed those instructions to yank my dog around. So I was inflicting pain on my dog that I said that I loved because I was being told to do so by an expert. Well, I couldn't continue. I dropped out of competition obedience, and at about the same time I learned about animal-assisted therapy, and that seemed antithetical to coercion training, so animal-assisted therapy seemed like a good niche for me. And several years later, I was introduced to clicker training. I haven't looked back since. Now, I fully realize that there is no one more obnoxious than a reformed anything, and here I've just confessed to you that I'm a reformed coercive trainer, but I'm not here to convince you to use any particular training method. Instead, what I want to let you know is that I use clicker training precisely because it resonates with me in the way that I choose to live my life. It's an expression of the respect that I have for my dog as an individual and as a thinking being. I'm sure some of you are highly involved in dog training, and some of you are minimally involved. I'd like you to watch a short video that might open your eyes a little bit to what is possible. I'm not quite there yet. There I am. Open your eyes a little bit to what's possible in dog training or in animal training.
So your fish does nothing. Until now. R2 Fish School Kit. Everything you need to train your fish to do amazing tricks.
You might be laughing, but it's not a joke. It really is true, and I have not trained a goldfish, although I am strongly considering it. I have several friends who have. It's very, very possible to train goldfish. And so how many of you think that that goldfish was trained with leash pops and showing that fish who was boss? Yeah, not so much. I read a master's thesis a few years ago where the candidate discovered 7 themes in dog trainers who use positive reinforcement. I had never thought about those themes myself, and I found it fascinating that this student, in interviewing many, many people, I identified these themes from clicker trainers. From her thesis, it appears that there are many other people out there who feel similar to me, that positive reinforcement is congruent with their life philosophy. So I'd like to go over just 4 of those themes with you briefly, as she stated them in her thesis. Positive reinforcement is intentional. I will talk more in a few minutes about intention and how important I believe that is in every aspect of life. For now, it's enough to say that when I have a training method available to me that incorporates intent into everything that I do, of course, that is what I will choose. Intent informs our actions. It affects other people's responses to my actions. My actions while training people or animals have as their goal to be respectful of that other person. Positive reinforcement promotes voluntary cooperation. I've mentioned how I reject coercion. An integral part of my spiritual practice is to strive for voluntary cooperation from others, no matter how many legs they have. And seeking voluntary cooperation does not mean I can't be firm when I need to be. Instead, it means that I respect others' opinions. I respect their rights, including the rights of my dogs, to choose to cooperate with me voluntarily instead of being forced to do my will. Positive reinforcement requires a focus on the other person. Part of my work is consideration for the person I'm working with, again, regardless of the number of legs. I have tremendous respect for the pain of the people that I see. I have tremendous respect for the animals that I work with. And it's important to me, as I've mentioned, that therapy animals want to do this work, whether they're my therapy animals or someone else's. So in fact, it's integral to my practice as an evaluator and an instructor in this field to assure that handlers, whether professionals or volunteers, assure that the therapy animal's well-being, and to assure that the animals who pass under my watch really have the desire to do this work with their handlers. This focus on others is part of a respectful, intentful practice. 4, positive reinforcement promotes calmness. I don't know about you, but I have plenty of things in my life that do not promote calmness. And I know enough about myself to know that I can far too easily get wrapped up in details, anxiety-provoking details and concerns. Yet, while working with my dog, I want to leave tension out of it. I choose to be calm instead. I center myself before working with my dog. I need to be centered and calm in order to take good care of my therapy animal and myself. When we're calm, we can more easily respect those we are with. In the book Made for Each Other, The Biology of the Human-Animal Bond by Meg Olmert, she explains the role of oxytocin in life. Oxytocin is probably the most well-known for its ability to induce labor contractions. Oxytocin is synthesized in the hypothalamus, the brain center that keeps our organs and bodily functions in good working order. Oxytocin-producing cells also branch out from the hypothalamus into every key brain region known to be involved in behavior and emotion. Oxytocin not only induces labor contractions, it also releases breast milk in new mothers. The baby's suckling then stimulates a wave of oxytocin that spreads throughout the mother's central nervous system. And it creates neural reactions that change her body and her mind. Oxytocin slows heart rate and lowers blood pressure in both men and women. It quiets the sympathetic nervous system. It inhibits the production of stress hormones. Breastfeeding women feel less aggressive and less anxious, as well as less suspicious and less guilty. They also enjoy greater physical ease and less muscular tension than bottle-feeding mothers. So as you can see, oxytocin is a leader in a coordinated and effective stress management strategy that new mothers require more than just about anybody else. Further research has shown that oxytocin creates strong feelings of attraction, recognition, and commitment between mammals, including between human and non-human animals. Further, we know that oxytocin's effects can be released after a simple glance, word, or gesture. Yes, it does come through physical contact with the loved one, but physical contact is not required. So while you're working and you make eye contact with your therapy animal, you may be getting a hit of oxytocin. The same thing can happen when you speak to your therapy animal, as well as when you reach out and touch your therapy animal. While we're on the subject of touch, let's look at another bit of interesting research. Research on rats showed that stroking the rat at a rate of 45 times per minute for 2 minutes raised the rat's oxytocin level and dropped the rat's stress hormone levels, heart rate, and blood pressure. Further, the rat had a more sedated demeanor, and its ability to tolerate pain increased. When rats were stroked for 5 minutes, the results were more pronounced and longer lasting. Our touch can produce a clear oxytocin effect in another species. This research proved that this can happen because all mammals have nerve cells just under the skin that activate the oxytocin cells in our brains. It is deeply gratifying to me that not only is oxytocin released in my brain when I pet my dog, but my petting also can release oxytocin in my dog's brain, or when I look at my dog, or when I speak to my dog. It's very important that our interactions are mutually enjoyable. Not that this work is just enjoyable for me, but that it's beneficial to them as well. So, back to handling. We've got a picture of the importance of relationship in our dogs' lives. We've looked at our personal and professional relationships with our dogs. We've considered how our relationship can affect the training method that we choose. So now it's time to look at how our handling style reveals the kind of relationship we really have. We say we have this wonderful relationship with our dogs, yet how do we demonstrate that relationship in our behavior? If we could observe ourselves, what would our behavior reveal about our relationship with our dogs? In fact, what does a good relationship look like behaviorally? Before I share the next set of photos, I'd like to offer thanks to the people who've allowed me to photograph them over the years, and their dogs and other animals. With each snapshot, it just is a tiny moment in time. We don't know what happened before or after that snapshot. So things change. We're always moving, always responding to our environment. And so I'm asking you, please, to not be judgmental as you look at these photographs, but instead use your judgment and your critical thinking skills to see what you might be able to learn from these photographs. And if you're so inclined, I would ask you to send a small blessing to the people and animals shown in these photographs as well. So just looking at what we see here in this photograph, the handler is the woman in blue on the left with her dog and several people gathered around. Now is when I'm going to ask you some questions that I'd really like for you to answer. These aren't just rhetorical questions. What do you see in this photograph, just from this woman's behavior? What do you see that says something to you about their relationship? Tension on the leash. What else? She doesn't trust her dog. What makes you say that?
She's ready to pull back away from a situation that could be a problem. She's standing up, the little kid is sitting down with the dog.
She's standing up, but the child is down. You were saying she's ready to pull back. She's
Unpredictable. She feels like the situation's unpredictable.
feels like the situation could be unpredictable. Thank you. I really appreciate your finding those behaviors. That is great. And I'm repeating them not necessarily because you might not be able to hear, but because of the recording. I want in the recording for us to be, am I doing something that's making it go black? Maybe, she says. And the dog's stance, what about the dog's stance is saying that he's nervous? I'm sorry, say again? The ears are where?
The ears are standing up, not normal.
Okay, standing up. And the tail is?
The tail, to me, the tail is like a sideways position, not like a wag.
Okay. sideways as opposed to a wag. We are getting a chance to perhaps laugh at the vagaries of technology instead of being worried about them. Thank you. And yes, again, thank you very much for finding those specific behaviors. Sometimes it's easy for us to put labels on things like nervous, because we've learned through our experience that this looks like nervousness. But it's really important for us to be able to identify as much as we can what those behaviors are. Because if on autopsy for me, they open me up and they look for nervous, they're not going to find nervous in here anywhere. But we can observe, well, I'm standing with my hands here, or I'm moving my hands, I'm acting like behaviors that might indicate nervousness. So you can identify those specific things, and you guys are doing a great job of identifying those with these photographs. Over here, there are 2 handlers standing and 2 black dogs. And then there are 3 handlers kneeling with a little dog here and medium and then tall. So let me see, 2 black dogs over here and their 2 handlers standing, then the 3 kneeling. So this is a social event. It's a function honoring therapy dogs and their handlers. And compare the feeling that you have. Well, let me say this. The handlers all look like, everybody looks like they're having a good time as far as the people go. They're laughing, they seem to be enjoying themselves. Here I just asked you for behaviors, and then I went into a label of enjoying themselves. So laughing I'm going to stick with. And then we don't know for sure about the dogs. It's a small room, it's crowded, it's noisy, there's lots of people in there. So of those 2 behaviors of the handlers, the standing handlers versus the kneeling handlers, which handler is in the better position to know how their dogs are responding to the stress of that environment? How many say standing? How many say kneeling? I would agree that the kneeling handlers are in a position they can put their hands on their dogs. They can feel what's going on. They're right there to be able to see easily instead of looking over them.
And what does that look on your face?
Yeah, the next slide, please. So here is another handler. She's dressed in brown and has a brown apron on. You're seeing her back. And what do you think about this handler's relationship with her dog? Excuse me, based on what you're seeing in this photograph.
I think it's good. I think she can tell how the dog feels, and at the same time gives the dog a sense of security.
So she can tell how the dog feels because she's down close, and she also can give the dog a sense of security by being close, having her hand on the back of the dog. Okay. Anybody else want to add something there? I'm sure you have many opinions. Okay, we'll keep going. How about in this one? The handler is sitting on a bench. The handler is actually this woman right here. Yeah, there we go. In the blue apron, thank you. And her dog is the little gray poodle. And lots of people around, some standing, some kneeling, some sitting. There's another handler with a dog in the background. There's a man in a blue apron, and you can barely see that he's got a dog near him as well. But who we're focusing on right now is the handler with the little gray poodle. What would you say about this handler's relationship with her dog?
Where's her left hand?
We can't see it. Her right hand is under the dog's belly, but we can't see where her right hand is. So that's a good question.
Wait, is her right hand?
No, right hand is under the belly.
I'm sorry, yes, we can't see her left hand. I need remedial left and right education. So she has control of the dog. How do you know that she has control? The hand is right underneath support. Yes.
The dog is looking back at her for
Oh, good point. The dog could be looking back to her for approval. The dog could be, I don't know, looking at whatever, but
where are all these people coming from?
where are these people coming from? There's lots of stuff going on, but certainly the dog does appear, because of the way his head is turned, he could be looking at her. What other observations do you have?
To me, the handler's face looks like she is nervous, not the dog.
Ah, the handler's face looks nervous to you.
Like, don't touch, don't do that.
Ah, okay. What is it about her face that says that?
The way her chin is tucked in.
Okay, tucked down chin.
And a nervous, I don't know the woman, but she looks like she's got a nervous smile, like, oh, don't do that.
And it says she might have a nervous smile like, oh, be careful about what's happening. Don't do that. Yeah, we don't know for sure what's going on. All of those are great observations.
Should a therapy dog be engaged with the people that are touching them, like visually and?
Yes, and that is, we like the dogs to be engaged with the people who are around. And that's one of the reasons why I said for us to use our critical thinking skills, because perhaps the dog just turned away at that second and that's when we got that photograph, and that the next second the dog was highly engaged. We don't know. So we're evaluating everything, and I appreciate your bringing that point up, yes. Which is a really good point, because if the dog isn't interested in engaging with all of these people, then the dog, it's not a good match to do that kind of work. Okay, what about this handler's relationship with her dog? Tight leash.
The dog wants the tennis balls.
The dog might want those tennis balls. Yep. And any of you that go through therapy dog evaluations, you're likely to find tennis balls for that very reason. So the leash is tight. What else do you notice about the handler's behavior? She's tense. Her muscles are tense.
Her hand and her hand elbow is locked.
Yes, hand and elbow look locked. They look like she's using a lot of muscle tension. Maybe she's even pulling back on the leash at that point. She's got her weight back so that she can brace herself in case she's needing to pull back more. Good observations. And what about in this photo? The handler is the woman in pink who's bending over. Should be on the floor with the little boy. What if this woman cannot physically be on the floor? Then the little boy should be up. Where should the dog be? Like on a table? Sitting somewhere, just where that handler has easier ability to get in touch literally with her dog. She can't do, she's limited in her ability to do things with her dog if something happens, if she's unable to, which actually this woman is physically unable to kneel, or to get up off the floor if she were to get down on the floor. Good points about the potential dangers involved in therapy dog work. Okay. Tell me what you're seeing. Face to face between dog and stranger. And the handler is the one holding the leash. She's very, she seems to be looking at somebody else in this moment, appears to be totally disengaged. She doesn't have her eyes on her dog. She would not see it if that dog were to do something that would harm the person whose face is in that dog's face. Anybody concerned about the leash? looks like a very, very long leash, lots of loops. I'm concerned about somebody tripping or, yeah, all of those pieces. So you are starting to identify a pattern here. You have identified several things over and over that you were indicating seemed like good practice or indicated a good relationship. One of those was you were talking about having the hand on the dog. One of those was you were talking about being close to the dog. One of those was keeping the eyes on the dog. You're seeing some patterns here. And again, remembering that we are going to be very gracious in our judgment. Here's someone who is talking, making a presentation, and her dog has a hunched back, ears are back, panting, leash wrapped around a leg. Now, this has probably happened to every single one of us if we've given a presentation and we've had a dog with us. And you can't really see it in this photograph, but this woman right now is looking at her dog. So she is trying to keep track of what's going on with her dog. She's also trying to make a presentation, and she's faced with the conflict. How do I take good care of my dog and make a good presentation at the same time? This is the same woman and the same dog. The dog looks happy. How can you tell the dog looks happy? Ears are forward. Alert. What does alert, what behavior shows alert? Head up, sitting up, posture. Soft mouth. Somebody else said facial, soft face. Yeah.
The leash is loose.
The leash is loose, and it's in her hand.
It's forehead expression.
Forehead expression. There may be some wrinkles there, but it's the wrinkles of having the ears forward as opposed to the frowny, wrinkles. So this is just a few minutes later, but the difference in her being able to be close to her dog, dog's comfort level, her ability to focus her attention on her dog. This was a role play situation. The woman holding the leash is playing the therapist. The woman sitting down is playing a patient or client. And the dog is saying, I'm out of here. And again, this, if any of us have been in a session with a client, we know that we can't have our eyes on our dogs every single second. And in fact, this woman, this therapist, is demonstrating good therapeutic technique by being so engaged with her client. But that means she's not engaged with her dog. So there can be a real conflict among people who are acting as a therapist and handling their own dog in a therapeutic session. It's impossible for this not to happen. You know, it happens to all of us. Okay. Let me catch up because I got so involved in looking at you and responding to you. I need to know where I am. I know where I am. Okay. So, when I work with dogs and their people, I'm constantly analyzing behavior. It's my job to analyze their behavior. And I love how much you all were analyzing the behavior in these photographs. Thank you. Over the years, I have found several behaviors that operationalize the concept of a respectful relationship. And what I mean by this is that I have broken down relationship into several behaviors and several behavioral principles that not only demonstrate relationship to an observer, but also, and more importantly, provide support to the therapy animal. And I'm saying animal here, not just dog, because these principles apply to any animal, even though we will be talking mostly about dogs. Ralph Waldo Emerson said, as to methods, there may be a million and then some, but principles are few. The man who grasps principles can select his own methods. The man who tries methods ignoring principles is sure to have trouble. So that's why these are called principles. Principles can be applied to individual situations, giving freedom rather than a constricted existence. We're going to take a look at some principles of handling that show that handlers are listening to their therapy dog partners and are supporting their dog's emotional needs. These are called the steps of teamwork, and they're from my book that is soon to be released, Teaming with Your Therapy Dog. I'm mentioning now that it's soon to be released. It is not available for purchase afterwards here, but I will have my iPad, and if you would like to be notified when it is available, I'm taking names and email addresses. Please believe me, it is going nowhere other than to notify you of when that book would be available, and I would be happy to get your information. So this graphic shows the steps of teamwork, starting at the bottom and working the way up to the top. These can be, excuse me, as I said, applied to every therapy animal. So we're going to start at the bottom because that's the foundation. And the P step is actually two principles. It starts with being fully present and then moves to maintaining close proximity. So we're starting with being present. Come on, inner peace, I don't have all day. Unfortunately, some of us, when we think about being present or centered, feel like this. And actually, being fully present means that before you interact with your dog, even for something as simple as routine brushing, and especially during animal-assisted interactions, you owe it to your dog and to yourself to get yourself in a centered state. Being fully present, as I said, is the foundation upon which all other steps and a good relationship is built. Centeredness is a state of being. It's a lifelong, moment-by-moment practice. It's a goal toward which I strive. I don't want to clutter my relationship with my dog with thoughts or emotions that are unnecessary to what we're working on, so I set those aside. I consciously set those aside and concentrate on what's going on right now at the current moment. That's what I mean by centeredness. Lightning is a standard poodle that I used to have. He died just about a year ago, and he was another exceptional therapy dog. You'll get to see another picture of him, another couple pictures of him later, but in the last evaluation that he and I went through, we were waiting to go in for our evaluation, and I, at the time, had a Prius, and he was in the back seat, and as we were sitting in the car waiting to go in, we had almost a half an hour before we were going in, he decided that he needed to be on my lap. Well, he's 60 pounds. And as I said, I was in this little Prius, but he crawled up from the back seat and circled and got on my lap between me and the steering wheel. And for almost a half an hour, he just sat there. And I have to say, that was almost a nirvana state for me. I could just be present with him. I put aside thoughts about that evaluation that we were going into and just focused on how wonderful it was to have him on my lap and be present next to his spirit. And then I have to say, when we went in for that evaluation, that stayed with us. He's never been that attuned to me. And I probably have never been that attuned to him either. But he was watching me, he was interacting with people appropriately, but he was right there. And I was right there for him. Boy, I wish I could recreate that. I miss him. I think about that when I want to think about the joy that we had together instead of the pain of our saying goodbye. But that was very, very powerful example to me of what centeredness can do. We can be centered, we need to be centered all the time. As I'm setting the food bowl down, I can be wishing my dog health. Instead of thinking about, okay, now I need to do the dishes, and then I have to wash my hair, and then I can really be focused on that moment. As I am checking his equipment and making sure that no hair is caught in the buckle and that nothing is too tight or too loose to rub on him, I can be wishing us a good relationship and a healthy time in our visit. As we're driving, I can be very present about what's going on the drive instead of thinking about, I need to do this, I need to do that, oh, this happened, oh, I didn't return that phone call. Yeah, all of that stuff needs to go away so that we can just simply be. Not easy. That's why I said it's a practice every day. So maintaining close proximity. Let's move to the other part of the P's. You can see in this photograph that the handler is this woman and her dog is right here. Handler is this woman and her dog is right here. They're not that far away. They're walking down a hallway. There is a therapist with a gait belt on a man who's using a walker. And the handler and her dog are leading the way down the hallway. Not that much space between those two people. But there's even less space here. She's just a little bit closer. And you might say that it seems like their relationship is closer because they're in closer proximity. Just to compare, now you can see, okay, so really there's only 1.5 feet or so between them, but it does have a different sense to the observer when she is close, and it makes a difference to the dog too, to know that that handler is close. The E step is to keep your eyes on your dog. And so this Labradoodle here, and here's the handler in the blue apron. The therapist actually has a photograph of the client's cat, and the therapist is doing an interaction, some work with that client, and so the handler's taking advantage of that opportunity to check in with her dog. She's got her hands under the dog's face, she's touching the dog, and her eyes, really hard to see, but she is looking at her dog, keeping her eyes on her dog to know what's going on. And here, they're getting ready to walk down the hallway. And again, kind of hard to see, but her face is turned down. She is looking at her dog. She knows that there's all kinds of other stuff down that hallway, but she is keeping her eyes on her dog to know what's going on and be advised early in case there might be a potential problem. The next step is T. Stay in touch with your dog. So in this slide, the handler is over here on the far right. Her dog, there's a leash, and then there's her dog. So this is a staff member interacting. Now, we talked about being in close proximity, and you can see that this handler is in fairly close proximity to her dog, but she's not touching her dog. Well, look at the next slide, and she has moved her knees closer, and she's bending over. And still, that wasn't enough for this handler. And you see that she needed to reach down, and with her right arm, her hands, her fingertips, are just barely touching her dog's toes. And that, to her, gave her the confidence that she needed so that her dog knew that she was there, and she knew enough about what was going on with her dog. Her eyes are on her dog. So she's modeling several of those principles in one photograph. And there it shows the difference between the first one, where she's more upright and a little farther away, to where she moved closer and moved her hand down to be able to stay in touch. Here's another example of staying in touch with your dog. The woman is in the blue, the handler, is in the blue apron, and her knee is not exactly touching her dog, but she is close. And this is a staff member bending over her dog's head. And in the next moment, the handler moved her body, leaned forward, put her hand on her dog's hip so that she was able to stay in touch with her dog. And there's the two side by side for you to compare. She was in close proximity, but it helped her to feel more comfortable, and it gave more support to her dog, for her dog to know that her hand was just there lightly, knowing she was in touch with her dog. So we've had the P for being present in close proximity, the E for keeping your eyes on your dog, the T for stay in touch with your dog, and the S is for speaking conversationally. We can speak in all kinds of ways, but a conversational tone implies a closer relationship, and it can be more pleasant for others to listen to, including the dog. So this handler has bent down even closer to be able to speak to her dog, maybe even to whisper. And speaking in a conversational tone is not limited to our voice, but also to hand signals. The hand signals that this woman is using, the hand signal that this woman is using is her hand it's very subtle. Asking her dog to sit. Her dog hasn't sat yet, but I'm sure that that dog is right about to sit in the next frame. And that's a very conversational hand signal. I remember in competition obedience that the hand signal that I was taught to give my dog for lying down was this. Well, if I were to use that in a therapy session, it looks like I'm about to be really angry at somebody. So I would say that that's not a conversational hand signal, but we can make our hand signals conversational. So it may be easy to see how these principles apply to volunteer handlers. And I suggest that they can also apply to professionals who are working with their therapy dogs. It might be a little more challenging, but that's why we get paid the big bucks, right? Yeah, right. As principles, they're applied individually, depending on the circumstances. And everything in the steps can apply to professionals. We can speak conversationally to our dogs. We don't have to yell. We can stay in touch with our dogs. It might not be by having the dog on leash all the time in our office. It might not be by having our hands on our dog all the time. That may be in too close proximity to the client. But we can call on our personal relationship skills and our eye contact. We can tune in emotionally with what's going on for our dogs. With the eyes, we can shift them back and forth. We can keep track of what's going on with our dogs as well as what's going on with our clients. And our proximity may be may be greater than a volunteer. We might be a little farther away, but again, in an office, in my office, I have much greater control of the environment. So there are not as many potential dangers happening in my office as there might be walking through a hospital floor or a classroom. And remaining present is essential to every practice, both personally and professionally. The book, To Bless the Space Between Us. And when I found the note, I really had no idea what the book was about. I hadn't even jotted down the author's name, but I have included that here for you on this slide. But as I found that note, I was really struck by that phrase. I was struck partially because I was remembering her and how much she meant to me. And I was struck partially because the words really resonated deeply. Because that's what our work is all about. To bless the space between you and me here today. To bless the space between us and our therapy dogs. To bless the space between our therapy dogs and our clients. The fact that I found that note just at the moment that I needed it is a perfect example of the space between that hospice patient and me being blessed. I can't guarantee that her spirit, she died a long time ago, came to me and pointed that out. I can't guarantee that a spiritual force caused me to open my eyes and notice that. But I can tell you I believe something like that happened. In some way, I was open, and I received the message, and I was blessed by receiving that message. Spirituality is important to me, and I feel no need to apologize for that. Spirituality is part of everything I do, and actually I believe it's part of everything all of us do. I am human, so sometimes I act in more close coordination with my spiritual values than at other times, but that's part of my spiritual practice too. And it may be because spirituality infuses every aspect of my life that I was drawn to hospice work. We who work in hospice are well known to call that work sacred. We believe strongly that it is so. And even those who don't work with death and dying easily acknowledge the sacredness of working intimately with people who have access to a place virtually unknown to those of us who are living, that place called death. I think all work can be sacred, however, not just religious work or work with death and dying. My good friend Webster tells me that one definition of sacred is devoted exclusively to one service. When we have the privilege of working with our therapy animals, whether going to a facility or working in our practice, aren't we devoted exclusively to that service? And entitled to reverence or respect. When we work to assure that our animals are protected from undue stress and are safe during our sessions, don't we feel that our therapy animals are entitled to respect? And when we get home, or even out into the parking lot after a session, aren't we frequently stunned by admiration and reverence for the work that we have just seen them do? So yes, I do believe that our work is sacred. And I believe that it's important for us to remember that our work is sacred. I believe that our therapy animals are worthy of reverence for their willingness to do this work with us. And when we hold this work as sacred, we bless the space between us. I'm sure some of you are familiar with Masaru Emoto's work, photographing water crystals. I'd like to tell you a bit about his work. And if something I'm saying does not make sense, please attribute it to my inability to express it accurately rather than a problem with his work itself. Japanese scientist Masaru Emoto first published a controversial collection of photographs of water crystals in 1999. He never intended his book to be more than a self-published work. Yet his work rapidly came to the attention of scientists and laypeople worldwide. He is now sought after as a speaker, and he has several books in circulation around the world. Mr. Emoto started with something we all learned in grade school. No two snowflakes are alike. Snowflakes are ice crystals, and Mr. Emoto developed a process to keep water at a temperature just below freezing, where the crystals were starting to form, but before it had solidified into solid ice. It took him 2 months of constant experimenting before he got his first photograph. And he found that he only had 20 to 30 seconds where he could take the photograph before the temperature rose and the crystals began to melt. He had to be extremely meticulous in his work. I'm sure, well, it is impossible to imagine those crystals if you haven't seen them, so I have a few of them here to share with you. This is a photograph, as you can see, of distilled, untreated water. Through his research, he learned things that are amazing to me. He found that different water forms different crystals. He found that some crystals were clearly similar, some were consistently deformed, and in some types of water, no crystals formed at all. Here's water from Antarctica, the crystal. Saijo Spring in Japan. And Biwako Lake that is highly polluted. Mr. Emoto and his assistant then thought about exposing the water to music and seeing if music made a difference in the formation of the crystals. He took some of the same water that had formed deformed or no crystals, placed that bottle of water on a table between two speakers, adjusted the volume to a level that would be just what normal people would be listening to, and he exposed each bottle to various forms of music and then photographed the water again. And this is a crystal that formed when the water was exposed to Japanese folk dance music. He found that music did change the crystals. So remember, this was water that formed deformed or no crystals that is looking like this now. He can tell what specific works by Beethoven, Chopin, and Mozart led to the formation of the most beautiful crystals. And heavy metal music, on the other hand, led to fragmented and malformed crystals, if crystals formed at all. Next, Mr. Emoto and his assistant wondered what would happen if they wrote words or phrases on pieces of paper and placed those pieces of paper on the bottles with the words facing in. He freely admitted that it made no sense whatsoever that water could read, but it seemed like the next thing to do. So he did it. He felt very strongly about this, and once again he found dramatic differences in the crystals that formed based on the kinds of words attached to the bottles. This is the crystal that formed when love and appreciation was the word taped to the bottle, attached to the bottle. So you may not be surprised to learn that water exposed to positive expressions formed attractive, well-formed crystals. And water exposed to negative expressions, on the other hand, barely produced crystals at all or produced malformed and fragmented crystals. I see like a figure in that as well, looking perhaps angry or ready to strike someone with the words, "You make me sick." And the words, "Thank you." Hitler and Mother Teresa. I don't know what this means to you, but I can tell you what it means to me. Our intent informs our actions. Our words and the intent behind them, the ability that we have to remain present, have a powerful influence on the world in a positive or a destructive way. Mr. Emoto emphasizes that our bodies are 70% water. So our bodies and the water in them can respond to the energies and the intents that surround us. Let's look at an example from our work with our therapy animals. If we truly honor our therapy animals, we treat them with a gentleness born of love. We speak to them in a respectful way. We touch them in a considerate way. We look at them in a loving way. We consider their needs as important, not just our needs or our clients' needs. And all of these behaviors have a positive effect on our animals. And all of these changes in our behavior towards our therapy animals are enhanced by our ability to remain present and to not worry about the PowerPoint. To go one step further, our intent also affects how our actions are perceived. So as we remain present, we look at and touch and speak to our therapy animals, and we are observed by clients and perhaps staff and visitors. It becomes obvious that the quality of our relationship with our therapy animals is different from maybe how the neighbor treats his dog. Clients see the respect that we have and the way that our animals work with us. They see a mutuality in relationship that's different from the way most people treat their animals. And they may hope that we will treat them with the same respect. And through this exchange, we bless the space between us. Rupert Sheldrake is a biologist and researcher in England. His PhD is in biochemistry. He's written over 80 scientific papers, and his 11 books are written in a way that's understandable to the layperson. His goal is to further a new worldview. Over 20 years ago, he first published a theory he calls morphic resonance. According to this theory, he explains that if something happens twice, it will happen again. He believes that events are capable of resonating in the same way that sound resonates, thus increasing the likelihood that the event will happen again. Several years ago, a television station in England conducted an experiment to test Dr. Sheldrake's theory. They prepared 2 paintings. Both looked like random patterns. But hidden within one was the figure of a woman wearing a hat, and in the other was a man with a mustache. On a live television program, one group of participants was asked to identify what they saw in the paintings. The great majority saw nothing but the random pattern. Later in the program, the secret of the painting with the man with the mustache was revealed. After the program, the same painting was shown to another group of participants who had been prevented from watching the program. And they were asked what they saw. The number of people in the second group who could identify the man with the mustache was 3 times greater than the number of people in the original group. The experimenters did their best to account for all possible factors that could affect those results. Yet, they concluded that the experiment seemed to support Dr. Sheldrake's theory. Once one person becomes aware of something, other people also tend to become aware. Thus, the second group was better able to recognize the pattern. More recently, the field of quantum physics has been exploring similar phenomena, proving with extensive high-technology equipment that the act of our looking at something has an effect on it. I think I need to say that again. Scientists have the proof of the effect of consciousness on things. Can you wrap your head around that? If I focus my attention on something, my attention changes that thing. This is true with inanimate objects as well as living beings. Well, if quantum physics wasn't hard science, I suspect that some of you might be throwing tomatoes at me right now. And there is some very interesting film of this phenomenon in the movie What the Bleep. So if you're interested, you might follow up there. And actually, it's not so hard for me to see this in children. If a parent or adult is watching, it's usually a child different. The child is acting differently than if the parent's attention is elsewhere. In fact, it's a frequent demand if the parent's attention is elsewhere. Watch me, watch me. So yes, they actively insist on receiving attention. And we can see this in our therapy dogs as well. They may actively seek our attention, and we also give them more attention probably than most people give their average pet. We make soft eye contact with them frequently. We touch them often in a loving and respectful way. We talk to them in a conversational tone. We create time when we are emotionally available to them. We do things with them outside of work. So in short, we focus our attention on them. If you think about it, do you think your dog began to change as you increased your attention on your dog? Do you think your dog has changed over the years you've been working with her? I thought I could make it through one presentation without getting emotional, but apparently not. This is lightning. And the photo on the left is the photo we saw of him on the internet from the rescue group before we got him. The photo on the right is 2 years later. Thank you. He had a beautiful spirit as well. I do miss him. Beautiful smile. So that's one example of how things changed for him in my life, in working with him and giving him my attention.
But it looks the opposite. It looks like on the left, it's an old dog. And on the right, it looks like a young dog.
Oh, yes.
It's the opposite. It's the loved.
Yes, the dog on the left looks older, when in reality he's the younger dog.
And that's what it does.
Yes, it can, yeah, reduce aging. Woohoo! Loving this. Yes, and of course, the effect is enhanced by the fact that the one photo is so fuzzy, and that was as clear as I could get it. But yeah.
Oh, it's very obvious that that's
Thank you. Thank you. So I can tell you what I see in my dogs when I am present with them and give them my attention. They, excuse me, I see them increase the amount of time they want to spend with me. And that's reinforcing to me. The more I work with them, the more they pay attention to me, look me in the eye, and check in with me, working with me in a way that's cooperative instead of a way that feels like it's contrary. And that's reinforcing to me as well. The more I focus my attention on them, the more I learn how to read what they're communicating with me. Our teamwork improves on both sides. And as a result, I see that being present and placing my attention on them is an expression of love, of sacredness. Just as my fragmented attention can create static in our relationship, my centered attention can bless the space between us. This concept is quite exciting to me in its implications for the effects of our work on our clients. As we do our work, we carry an awareness of the powerful effect our therapy animals can have on clients, whether or not we see a difference immediately before our eyes. And it's hard being so patient and waiting and not getting any attention. We carry an intention regarding our actions with others, our interactions, expecting that they will find our efforts beneficial. We focus our attention on our therapy animals, just as we focus our attention on our clients. Might these things not increase the effectiveness of our work? As we greet people in our offices, as we move through the facility, as we walk around the lake, as we go grocery shopping, we carry our awareness with us, much like those words on Mr. Emoto's bottles of water. We have the opportunity to focus our attention on those we meet wherever we go, rather than being distracted by the clamoring of the multitudes of things that distract us. With each interaction we have, we may create a morphic resonance for the next person or dog that client meets. As we focus our attention and hold our intent, think of the potential we all have to bless the space between us. So, I say again, our words and actions and the intent behind them have a powerful influence on the world in a positive or a destructive way. The steps of teamwork that we use with our dogs not only release oxytocin in our and our dogs' bodies, they convey a respectful relationship with our dogs to all who observe them, and more importantly, they demonstrate our respect to our dogs. As Wayne Dyer says, ordinary is not good enough. There are many ways of being in the world, and many ways of being with our dogs. I suggest to you that being an ordinary handler is not good enough. You know too much to be ordinary. Your relationship with your dog is too significant to be ordinary. Neither you nor your dog are ordinary. So perhaps ordinary is not good enough for you, too. Thank you for your time today. May you go forth with sacred intent to have an extraordinary relationship with your dogs, and perhaps you will become gladiators of love and joy. Thank you.
Thank you so much, AnneHowie, for sharing your time and experience with us. I think we all thoroughly enjoyed your presentation. I want to tell everybody thank you for coming here today. We are hoping to spend the next hour or so with Anne and our reception, and Phil and Samara. Or maybe we could take some questions before we break into our reception.
Good.
Okay.
Any questions? Yes.
What kind of work have you done around the world, as someone was mentioning in the introduction?
what kinds of work have I done around the world, all related to animal-assisted interactions. I counted once, I think it was 6 countries, 3 continents, where I have taught either healthcare professionals or volunteers related to this field, and I feel very blessed to be able to do this work that I enjoy so much. Thank you. Anybody else?
I was just going to comment on the blessed space between us. When you see the documentaries on what the dogs do, and even the cats with the inmates in prison, people that have no ability to connect or never felt love or were able to give love. And it's remarkable the way these animals turn the lives around of these people and help them see the possibility of a productive future and a loving future.
Thank you. Yes, the contact with animals, dogs, cats, and other animals as well, can really help people turn their lives around. You were mentioning people in prisons. I had one experience in a psychiatric unit with a young man who had had many instances of cruelty to animals, dogs in particular. And so as I was talking with the staff about whether or not he should be included in the group work that we were doing, they felt that it was safe, and they made a contract with him that if he was feeling like he needed to do something to harm the therapy dog, that he would talk to a staff person and perhaps leave the group. We only had 3 group sessions with him before he was discharged, and I checked in with the staff afterwards about their experiences. I was curious. And he had said to them that up until that point, he really did not know that animals were living beings. He had perceived them solely as objects. It had not occurred to them that they would have feelings or feel pain. And by his few experiences with the therapy dog in groups, that his mind had been changed. I know that's just one tiny example, but thank you for bringing that up. Philip, you were...
Well, it was kind of along that line. So we've been working with Debbie Stevens, and we've had a request to... oh, that's okay. Well, we've had a request to... Markham, come. We've had a request to consider a program that would work with what they refer to as treatment-resistant clients. Probably some of the more challenging clients in the. And so you're really talking in your presentation very directly at the kind of importance of mindfulness as part of animal-assisted interventions. And so I was wondering about how that might look in an environment that is, as institutional as let's say a maximum security type of environment. Is it even appropriate from your perspective to consider utilizing that in a setting that is bound to have real life risks, for example? And Debbie, maybe you have ideas. I'm just curious about, there's a little, it's not necessarily an environment right now that's conducive to a lot of mindfulness types of interactions automatically. It's not to say that it couldn't be, but it's...
Well, I would welcome other people's comments about working in a prison. I have worked in a prison. I had volunteered in a prison for many years, over 10 years. And then when I started to work there, 40 hours a week plus, found that I couldn't tolerate the environment. Now, this was in the state of Washington, and their structure is corrections, not teaching people how to live their lives better once they leave. So that's what I could not tolerate. I was not allowed to have therapeutic interactions. I was not allowed even to say to someone, this is a different way of clipping a dog's toenails. So I was far too restricted to be able to tolerate that kind of an environment.
Which prison were you at, Gig Harbor?
I was at the Gig Harbor Washington Correction Center for Women. Yeah.
How long ago?
2000.
Jeannie Hannibal?
Right after Jeannie, yeah. Did you want to say more about the?
Mine was a different question.
Okay. Well, first though, hang on to that. Was there someone that could or wants to respond more to the prison environment. Yes.
I'm Debbie Stevens. This is Darlene McGinnis and Margie McNew. We are all, I can talk loud.
But this is for the
Oh.
tape, and that you can't talk loud enough for that.
Oh, doggone. Okay, we all work in the prison system. I started the program in the women's facility in Canyon City in 2002. Since that time, there you are. Since that time, we've had over 7,000 dogs go through the program. Understanding being part of Colorado Correctional Industries, we are not tax funded. Our fundraiser is boarding and training. We, as far as the interaction between the people and dogs and the bond and the life-changing, wow, the life-changing experiences that we have seen. You know, we see offenders that go from being an absolutely closed person that, you know, has built a shell around themselves as a way of protection, to seeing the dog's acceptance, unconditional acceptance of them, and the fact that they're able to help and give back. They learn new life skills, acceptance, they become better parents, they become receptive to other people around them, accepting their team members, more like family actually than other people. What am I missing, ladies?
I think with the men, a big part of it is the tolerance, and they feel like when their children come in to visit them, it gives them a whole new appreciation. Patience and new appreciation for being with kids, their own children. Come on, I spoke, you can do it.
It's not to say that the program's perfect. It's not. We have our lumps and bumps, and a constant educational, I don't want to say battle, but I guess battle, for lack of another word, of how an offender can be a human being instead of just a number. The same thing you experienced at Gig Harbor. You know, it's pretty phenomenal, and I'm quite interested to see what is going to happen with somebody that is in solitary confinement and exposing them to a dog, for them to learn new life skills so they can rehabilitate and help that dog.
Thank you. I want to return, though, to your question, Phil, about the mindfulness piece. And my bias is that mindfulness is applicable everywhere. Can't say that from experience in the prison system, but that's where my bias lies, that it's still applicable. Thank you. Okay, you have been very patient. You get extra credit. No, don't say that.
I walk dogs at the dump friends, so I've been doing that for 11 years. And I feel like I have formed a pretty close bond with these dogs pretty quickly. It's interesting, even after I walk them for 20 minutes, I can go back by the kennel and it's like, I know you, and they're all excited. And I've actually seen some out in parks where they immediately run over. Do they remember my smell? Do you think they remember me? I'm just curious from your experience with animals. I always feel like they do.
Thank you. Yes, you're saying that you walk dogs for a living and you...
Well, I volunteer.
Okay, volunteer. And you see them recognize you almost immediately after even a short period of time.
But even sometimes later, I'll be at a park and I go, oh, I love that dog. Where'd you get it? I think I got it at the dump frenzy.
Yeah.
I knew I walked that dog.
Yes.
And they come over and they'll start looking at my hand and stuff. And I'm going, you
They
remember me?
recognize, yeah.
I don't
Well, from my experience, scent is incredibly powerful. And yes, in my work in scent work, we can expose a dog to a scent and they'll remember it for a long time. So I'm glad that I don't smell the same things that they smell. But it certainly can be scent, and perhaps there's also an energetic piece there that they are aware of. In our energy, how we conduct ourselves, posture, those types of things. That I'm not the expert on dog recognition of people, but.
I do think dogs feel safe around me, so maybe it's just a safety.
And a safety, yeah.
Probably more than that, actually. So I mean, one of the ways to think about this would be the reason why we've used mammals in human tests for medication, surgery methods, all sorts of things like that, is that we have a lot of physiological and anatomical similarities to other mammals. And so if you were in a confined space and you were stressed out and a kind person came along and took a moment to help you relax, to get exercise, to do some enrichment like you're doing as a dog walker, would you remember that person? Right, so one of the things that we do to animals all the time is we act like we can't tell. I would trust what you're seeing as behavior that would indicate that they recognize it is probably your most accurate information. We'll never have that dog write you a letter, maybe, or send you the email or call you up on the phone, right, or can pass you their card or whatever we do. But there's no reason to believe that what we would have as an experience wouldn't be similar. It doesn't have to be a human feeling for it to be a recognizable set of feelings that an animal would have too.
I think rescue dogs form a really strong bond. They know that they were rescued from not a hospital to a hospital. Every dog I've ever rescued, the bond, more than if I went out to pet school or I got it from a breeder, those bonds form even closer. I really believe that's why I'm kind of a big advocate of rescue.
Well, we know we have that work going on with African elephants that have been experiencing the trauma of the war, living in war zones, the mass genocide going on in poaching activity, and they do have very similar presentations to people with post-traumatic stress disorder.
I don't even know how to summarize all of that for the film, so maybe you, I don't know what you guys are going to have to do your magic. Thank you. Any other questions? Oh, just scratching, okay. Yes?
I'm really pretty new to all of this, but I was just wondering, it seems like we ask a tremendous amount of our dogs.
Mm-hmm.
And you talk about the sacredness. How do you know you honor your dog when you're not doing it for yourself?
What a wonderful question. Just so that everyone can hear, she said, how do you know that you're honoring your dog and not just doing it for yourself? How do you honor that sacredness? I want us to savor that question for a moment because that's very important. I agree. We ask a tremendous amount of our dogs in the 21st century, more than they were originally designed to do. And we ask it without a second thought. So one of the things that we owe it to them to do is to learn about dog behavior and what those various behaviors mean so that we can interpret as accurately as we know in our human level of knowledge what the dog is saying. If I reach out to touch my dog in the way that I always do, to come my hand along the side of his head, and he moves even a quarter of an inch, I know that that tells me about something that's going on for him, because usually he leans his head into my hand. So even something that subtle. I know that he likes being around me and being on the bed, but if I offer him to come up on the bed and he turns and walks into the other room, I can respect that and say, whatever's going on. that he gets to have that. I need to know when I am working what those behaviors are. Somebody said, several people said, dogs need to be engaged with the people that they are, therapy dogs are supposed to be engaged with the people they're visiting. So if my dog isn't, that tells me something. I had one dog who at one point we went on to the psychiatric unit and he said hi very briefly and then he curled up in a ball at my feet. And I noted that and I thought, okay, well, we'll try it one more time. And so the next week, we gave him a week break, went in the next week. He did the same thing. After a very brief greeting, he curled up at my feet. And I left the psychiatric unit at that point. I knew enough to pay attention that there was something going on for him. We tried another venue, and he was fully engaged and thoroughly enjoying himself. So for whatever reason, I don't have to know. All I know is he wasn't enjoying that anymore, and thank goodness I had learned enough to pay attention to that instead of continuing with my conversation and ignoring the fact that he was curled up in a little ball. There are some great resources out there for learning about dog behavior, and my books actually in the resources section give many of those resources. So, and certainly come up and talk with me after if you'd like. Yeah, thank you.
This will be brief, but it kind of touches on what she said. I just had to put down a service dog that I had for 13 years. She was actually 16 years old, but I had her for that many years. She was trained for me in Florida, but I lived here in Denver. And I wanted to point on this because it's something that happened, and this touches on what you said. I went to a reputable company here in Colorado to have my eyes checked, and well, she was my service dog because I have seizures, and the doctor that I went to go see pushed her to get her out of my way, and she panicked when she did that, and every time I had to go into that same building, whether it be for my eyes or for me to go in for something else or to get a prescription, the minute we pulled into that driveway, she panicked and had like dog PTSD because she remembered that that man was mean to her, and it ended up where I 2 months later reported what that man did to my service dog, because by law it's not allowed for them to do that, and that company ended up making me non-member of their insurance company because they didn't believe it.
Oh, goodness.
But I just wanted to touch base. You've got to be advocates for your animals and for your service dogs or your therapy dogs, because they will feel, because no matter how much I tried to go in and over and reframe that building, it didn't work. I just had to go to a different facility because she couldn't take it.
Your word advocacy is so important. They rely on us to be their advocates. You were explaining that you recently lost through death a 16-year-old service dog, and that during the time that dog was working for you, a physician had pushed the dog out of the way to provide service to you.
But harshly.
And I'm sorry?
Harshly.
Harshly pushed, yes. And so the dog remembered that and had a stress reaction whenever they returned to that area. Many other details that were horrible that should happen to you and your dog, and I really appreciate your advocacy.
But I want to pay attention to what I could deal with it, but the dog couldn't. And she could never deal with the parking lot and part of the building because she remembered what that person did to her.
Mhm.
I don't care what happened to me, but to her, to the dog. No matter what we tried, I would drive there daily to try to reframe it for her. It just didn't work out.
Yeah, he was preventing her from doing her work. She couldn't be near you. Yeah, thank you for sharing that. And again, accept my condolences at your loss. Maybe one last question, or Philip, maybe you have.
Well, I think we have your books in the back of the room.
Okay.
So we're going to transfer you back there so that if people want to come and get your book, get AnneHowie's signature in that book. That's always the fun of having an author in our presence.